Welcome everyone to the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association, presented to you by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. We have a great program today with Chad Garcia, our friend from Ave Maria Mutual Funds. How are you today, Chad?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. Let's start with a prayer, shall we? Father, Son, Holy Ghost, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, not the hour of our death. Amen. Our Son, Holy Ghost, amen. Well, Chad, it's great to have you today. This is actually the first episode of the Faith and Finance Forum for our 2023 season, so we wanted to kick it off with a really strong guest. And Chad, you certainly fit that bill. You are with Ave Maria Mutual Funds. You are the lead portfolio manager and co-portfolio manager of the Ave Maria Growth Fund, and you are also responsible for equity research functions for the firm. That's a big portfolio, man. How are you holding all that down?
Doing well. So I'm the lead portfolio manager for the Ave Maria Focused Fund, which is I would say a unique mutual fund in the sense that it's a legal non-diversified fund, and so I have a limited number of holdings, but we know the companies quite well, and I can take some big swings on them. And then I'm the co-portfolio manager of the Ave Maria Growth Fund.
I love it. Busy man. That's great, Chad. And actually, there was some big news that I caught for Ave Maria Mutual Funds in the past week. Do you want to share that with our audience?
Well, with respect to the Focus Fund, it was recognized by the Wall Street Journal as being one of the category kings for its January performance. So
that sounds like a big deal.
The category that they have us in, there's probably around 600 mutual funds that they compare us to, and it was number 2 out of the 600.
Chad, that's incredible. Congratulations. That's great. Well, let's get to know you a little bit. I know you grew up on a family farm in Arizona, but let's hear a little bit more about your background.
Sure. Well, like you said, I grew up on a family farm in Yuma, Arizona, which is on the southwest tip of the state. It borders the Colorado River in California and Mexico. My family grew lemons and alfalfa, and I had an interest in agriculture as well as an interest in business. And so when I decided to go to university, I studied agribusiness. I went to the University of Arizona for 4 years, and then I took a job with a multinational agribusiness firm called Cargill, and they moved me around the country, and I got some great experience running businesses for them, and decided to pursue my passion in finance and left to go to business school.
So what was it like growing up on the family farm?
Well, it was good. You get to learn a strong work ethic growing up. My parents, who didn't go to college, had that aspiration for me, and so they allowed me to work hard on the farm in the summertime and save up money, but then they kept me focused on school and other activities during the winter.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, most of us didn't grow up on a farm, so it's always intriguing talking to somebody that did. I mean, it sounds like from a very young age, you were working extremely hard, making contribution to your family and to the family business, right?
Right, and there's certainly some parallels and lessons that I learned growing up on the farm that are relevant to what I do now as an investor. My father had a reputation for being producing some of the best alfalfa around, and he was well known for that. And when you bale hay, you have to do it at a certain range of moisture. If it's too wet, the hay will get moldy. If it's too dry, you'll lose a lot of the leaves and tonnage. And I baling the hay, you go out there and you might sit in the field for hours waiting for the right level of moisture to come in. I was out with my father one day, and the moisture on our field was right in the perfect zone. So he started up his baler and started baling, and I looked around and I saw other farmers that were within viewing distance do the same thing. And later he said, that those other farmers, they started baling when I did because they saw what I did. But just because the climate was right where we were at doesn't mean that it was right where they're at. They shouldn't follow me. They should do their own work. So being independent and doing your own work is one of the key tenets of a successful investor. So
I love
I get
that.
to learn
And it also sounds like attention to detail is important.
it is. It is.
So you went to the University of Arizona. What was your first job out of college?
First job out of college was working for Cargill. That's the multinational, and they had me in a rotation program where every year they move you to another city, into another business, and you get a promotion. And after a 2-year training program, you are part of a management team of one of their businesses. And so the division that I was in was the animal nutrition division. So we made animal feed that would be used for commercial operations such as dairies or hogs or laying hens, as well as farm store feed, so consumer products that somebody would, with a small plot of land, if they have pets or horses or whatnot, would buy bag feed.
Just fascinating. Very cool. So where'd you go from there? What came next?
I went to Harvard for business school, and I was there for 2 years. After Harvard, I went to New York and worked on Wall Street for a couple of years in investment banking. And in that role, I advised companies that were buying or selling other businesses. So I was in the mergers and acquisitions group. From there, I took a job at a private equity fund. And a private equity fund is an investment fund, but instead of buying stocks or bonds, they buy the entire business. So I was in private equity for several years, and about 8 years ago, I transitioned into the public markets, which is where I'm at now.
Wow. Okay. So what was it like at Harvard? That's another thing most of us don't know a lot about.
Well, there's the business school was the first graduate business school in the world, and the pedagogy there was case based, and so you have a classroom of about 90 highly intelligent people from different backgrounds from all around the world. About 39% of the class was international, and you're presented with a case. You don't know really what the problem is. You have to look at the facts of the case and see what problems the managers who are protagonists of the case are trying to solve. And you act like as if you're in their shoes and come up with your own solutions to their issues. Oftentimes, the protagonist of the case may be there watching you present it, so it could be a pretty exciting and interesting.
I mean, it sounds like a great way to learn. I mean, it's real life stuff. It's practical, and you said it. If you actually have the real life participant present, I mean, that adds a whole other dimension. That's a cool way to go. I like that.
Well, there are certainly textbooks, but textbooks are there for reference.
Yeah.
So such as life, I would suppose.
That's right. Well said. Well, Chad, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. You're Catholic, I believe, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship with the Lord.
Sure. I grew up Catholic, although more culturally Catholic. I made it through my first communion with respect to a formal catechesis. Drifted away from the faith a little bit, but the cultural part of it was always there. And as I said, I worked in private equity for a bit. The fund that I worked at had an investment philosophy that aligned with my skill set. And at one point, they decided to change their investment philosophy, and I decided to look for another fund to work. So I took some time off to focus on my full-time search for a new investment fund to work at. And I had plenty of time on my hand, and during that time, I in addition to looking for a full-time job, I was able to take time and really study the faith. And so, I learned a little bit about my faith when I was a child, but most of what I learned with a fully formed intellect, which I think is somewhat unique from how people learn their faith. So
No, it is. That's very interesting. Well,
so I took that time to really dive into a lot of the theologians and the Bible, and reading some of the great classics of the faith, and that brought me back around to it.
It's very interesting. I mean, like we all have a different path. You know what I mean? And you unsurprisingly, pursuing the intellectual route and the books, and find the Lord through all that. That makes sense, and that's very interesting. So here you are at Ave Maria Mutual Funds. Tell us a little bit about that organization.
Sure. Well, Schwartz Investment Counsel, which is the firm that I work at, is the manager for the Ave Maria Mutual Funds. That was started by George Schwartz in the early '80s, and so that was an investment management firm. They had several private client accounts as well as a mutual fund. Around 2000, Tom Monahan asked George to start a mutual fund family that would be targeted towards Catholics, where Catholics can invest in the market and do so in a manner that wouldn't violate their faith. So that was the genesis for Ave Maria Mutual Funds. It started with one mutual fund, and now we have several different mutual fund products. And the way that we work is that, if you look at the bishop's guidance to how one should invest as a Catholic, in my mind, they give you about three different ways to do it. Number one, you could what I call do no evil. So don't participate in any activities that violate the teachings of the faith. The second way that they allow Catholics to invest, or advise Catholics to invest, is to invest how you want in any company, but if the company has activities that are contrary to the teachings of the faith, use your position as a shareholder to advocate for change within the company. And then the third way would be invest in companies that do some good, whatever that means. And so the approach that we take at the Ave Maria funds is the do no evil approach. So we have a board of advisors who set up a screen, or activities that companies would participate in that would violate the teachings of the faith. And so would be corporate contributions to Planned Parenthood or other abortion activities, pornography production or distribution, and participating in embryonic stem cell research. And so those are the areas that we won't invest in, and we have a zero tolerance policy. So we don't try to parse that X% of the business is doing this, and so it's kind of de minimis. Nope, we have a zero tolerance policy.
Nice. And if you know the details of it, I'm curious, how do you constantly evaluate that? Obviously, determining that at one point is as good as that one point. That company could have a change in leadership or a change in governance, and start doing bad stuff the day after the scan, right? How do you stay on top of it, I guess, and make sure that the company is remaining true to those morally guided activities?
Well, we spend a lot of money on some screening services that help us out, but that's part of it. The other part is due diligence that is done hand in hand with financial and business due diligence that we do on our companies. And so, sometimes the screening services has false positives where it may flag a company, but if you do the work on it, you'll find out that they're not a violator of those screens. And then sometimes you'll find things that they miss. So it's a combination of outside screening services plus our own due diligence.
It's very interesting. These days, the topic of values-based investing, morally-based investing is very popular. You hear a lot about it. It seems like a lot of financial advisors and advisory firms are purporting at least to provide that, an investment portfolio aligned with your faith. It sounds like Ave Maria Mutual Funds been doing this a long time, though. You're not really kind of the new kid on the block. You've been doing this a long time before it became a popular movement.
Well, we've been doing it for over 20 years.
Yep.
And with respect to a lot of the ESG investing that's been quite popular, I would say a lot of that is marketing, and as opposed to an actual choice that the manager has to make that may cost them. So what does it cost us? Well, let's say there's a business that has 1% of its activities are something that's objectionable. Well, we won't invest in that, despite perhaps liking the investment otherwise. So it actually costs us something. Now, I think that our results have proven that we can generate exceptional returns, despite having some companies, unavailable to us. But I would say if you look at other investments with ESG type, social programs, like what's it costing them?
Yeah, I mean, is there an educational component to it? I'm curious about that. So, like, if a company has been flagged through your processes as doing something morally objectionable, something that would preclude you from working with them, do you have a conversation with them? Do you reach out to them and say, "Hey, just FYI, we caught this," and maybe they're not even aware of it, or maybe they're not aware of the consequences of it.
Certainly, some companies aren't going to care, but some companies do, and there's been numerous examples over the years of the life of the Ave Maria Mutual Funds where we may have reached out to a company that had corporate contributions to Planned Parenthood and told them that because of that we weren't going to invest in them, and they have changed.
Wow.
Recently, we are invested in a asset manager that focuses on digital infrastructure. So think about cell towers and data centers and dark fiber and the like. They had an investment in a data center company, and I was able to find out that one of their portfolio companies, one of their clients was Pornhub, which aside from the pornography has been linked to human trafficking and sexual abuse and having pictures of minors there. And so I went to the company and said, "Hey, do you know that this portfolio company of yours has this company as a client? And by the way, they've been linked to trafficking and other nefarious activities that are not only reprehensible, but they're immoral and illegal. You might want to take a look at that." And within a week, I received word from the company that the Pornhub had been removed from the data center, and they were going to put up procedures in place to make sure that they didn't come back in through some third party.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story, because that's a great example of the impact of this kind of work. You know what I mean? If you weren't out there, informing that company, maybe they would have kept doing it for years and, jeopardized, children and vulnerable people. So, gosh, thanks for sharing that story.
I mean, and I don't think that the company was even aware that they may have been in there.
Yeah.
But there are ways to figure in that industry. There's ways to figure out how people that would want to connect with Pornhub on how to do it. And so if you know how to look for it, then you can find it. And I went after they told me that they got the business out, I went and checked on in the same manner that I learned about it, a month or two later, and they were in fact gone. So
Wow, interesting. Speaking of returns, despite abundant evidence to the contrary, there's still a lot of people that think you kind of got to go either or on this stuff. You either have to have a morally aligned portfolio, or have great returns on your investments. That's not the case, right? I mean, you can have both. I mean, you can enjoy great returns and have a morally congruent portfolio, right, Chef?
well, if you look at the performance over the last 12 months for several of our funds, are ranked within the top 10% of their Morningstar peer group. So I think that's because you can have it both ways.
Yeah, I think so too. And obviously, we're not here to get into the detail of returns, but I just hope everyone listening, you don't have to invest in bad stuff to have success with your portfolio. I mean, you can have, but these are my words. I mean, you can have both. So, Chad, what are some of the areas of the industry and the profession that you're particularly interested in? Just tell us about some of your expertise areas, some of the things that you spend a lot of time studying and enhancing your knowledge around.
So, well, we can talk about the Focus Fund because it's the one I'm closest with. I mean, we have around 17, 18 holdings in the portfolio. The holdings are eclectic, and so I look for ways to grow my shareholders' value, and I don't really care about sector weightings all that much. I don't try to hug an index as many try to do. But what I'm looking for is companies that have a long runway for growth, that can generate high returns on their invested capital, and typically have some strong pricing power. And once I find companies that fit those criteria, I want to buy them at a reasonable price, and then give them time to grow. And so I'll only want to make changes if my thesis on the business is wrong, or if the fundamentals of the company start to deteriorate, or if I find a better company to replace it with. So ideally, we're looking for about a 5-year hold for our investments.
And can you share with us any of your any of the details of your approach to evaluating a company? I mean, what are you looking for?
I'm looking, well, Warren Buffett talks about economic moats, and so that's businesses that have strong competitive dynamics and characteristics. And so I'm looking for businesses with economic moats, and like I talked about, having the ability for them to generate high returns on their invested capital. That's a high return on invested capital is one indication of a moat, and so that's the quantitative part of the job. But a lot of it is more qualitative. And so let me give you an example. One of the largest positions in the fund is a company called eDreams, which is an online travel agency based in Europe. The business in 2017 launched a subscription program they call Prime. It's modeled off of Amazon Prime, or maybe even like a Costco membership. And so if you're a Prime customer, you pay 55 euros a year to them, and then the benefit is that they don't charge you margins on any bookings that you make. So you get savings on any trips that you plan with them, which pays itself back in, call it 2 trips. That subscription locks customers into using eDreams. And when they book their trips, they don't go through Google or other paid searches. They just go straight to eDreams' website or use their apps to book the trip. That is a indication of a high quality company, and one that we're happy to be invested in.
No, I could see why. That's fascinating. So, do you manage a team, or do you work most days on your own?
We have several portfolio managers and several analysts, and it's pretty collaborative. So somebody may come up with an interesting investment idea and present it, and we're free to use that or not. And so I have some positions in my portfolio that were first sourced from other portfolio managers or analysts on my team. But ultimately, you can't rent conviction, and so if it's going to go in my portfolio, I still got to do my own work on it and get comfortable with it.
And you mentioned that the Ave Maria Mutual Funds has a board. I assume it's a board of directors that is responsible for establishing this screening protocol, and generally safeguarding the culture of the organization. Tell us a little bit about the board and its role in Ave Maria Mutual Funds.
Well, we have a couple boards. We have the board that oversees Schwartz Investment Council, which is like a typical board of directors that oversees a business. And then with respect to the mutual funds, we have the Catholic Advisory Board, and the Catholic Advisory Board is comprised of some prelates and theologians and businessmen. They're the ones that sets the investment policies with respect to like what we cannot invest in.
Okay, and the goal, right, is congruence and alignment with the teachings and laws of the Catholic Church, right?
Correct.
Okay, very good. And that group, and then they I guess, have visibility on the screening technology that you use to make sure that the companies you're investing in are aligned with that too, right? That's kind of the flow of it.
Well, yeah, we'll discuss the screening technology, but keep in mind a lot of it is just everyday due diligence and studying of the business as well. So they're more. I would say that they're probably more concerned with setting the standards and then leaving it us to find ways to adhere to it.
That makes sense. And, I think about an episode that occurred like in the past year. I remember a lot of members of the Catholic Finance Association were very troubled by this. In the wake of the Dobbs decision, a lot of public companies in the United States were announcing that they were going to, provide this travel benefit for abortion. Like when an episode occurs, like, and big media companies were publishing lists of the companies that were going to provide this. Is that something that would kind of come across your radar screen and say, hey, this is an indicator this is a company that we shouldn't be investing
in? That's certainly the top of mind of the Catholic Advisory Board, but I would say that with respect to a situation like that, they would differentiate, or at least right now differentiate between what they would call an employee benefit versus a corporate contribution to Planned Parenthood. So let's say in addition to the travel, a lot of companies have decided to make large corporate contributions to abortion providers, and so that is something that we don't support, and we won't invest in a company if they do that. And there's been a handful of companies that I've looked at as potential investments in the last quarter that ultimately I had to pass on because of that issue. Now, some companies have employee match programs where if a employee gives some money away to a nonprofit, the company will match. As it stands now, the advisory board has looked at that as more of an employee contribution as opposed to a corporate contribution. So we have to look at those areas. With respect to the travel, I would assume that the travel kind of falls in the same category.
I'm curious though.
From a corporate contribution.
Okay, so you would see that kind of as an equivalent morally objectionable practice that one wouldn't be worse than the other. Either would disqualify a company in your estimation.
Right now I would think the travel would be more of an employee benefit, and so that wouldn't exclude it as of now. But it's certainly because of the Dobbs decision and the Catholic Advisory Board is certainly aware of it, and I would say studying it.
Well, and it does seem that a company that was providing travel reimbursement for abortions is likely to be a Planned Parenthood corporate donor anyway. I'm sure it's not 100%.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then they're out. They're certainly on the what we call the offender list. So.
The offender list. Okay, very good. Nobody wants to be on the offender list for Ave Maria Mutual Funds, and most people don't. So, Chad, let's talk about the stock market a little bit in 2022. What were some of the things that surprised you? What were some of the things that you thought you maybe predicted well? I mean, I'd just love to get your general analysis on last year's performance.
Well, we went from having 0 interest rates at the beginning of the year to tracking to 4.5%. And so when you make a massive change like that, you're going to have bad things are going to happen. So
yeah, what bad things happened do you think as a result? What are some examples of?
Well, the market ended down 20%, which is it's fine and shouldn't give any long-term investors any concern. But the stocks that were most hardest hit were the ones that were growing the fastest, because the ones that are growing the fastest have earnings that are pushed out much farther into the future. And when your interest rate goes up, then the discount rate on those future earnings also increases, which lowers the value of them. So the companies that got hit the hardest were the ones that had the fastest growth. So it wasn't too surprising. Question is, yeah, the question is that going forward, can the growth of those companies outweigh the hit that they took in 2022? And for the most part, the companies that are profitable and growing, I think they can. The ones that were unprofitable, or their cost of capital is going up, so then they're going to have to make some hard decisions on how they're going to grow.
Yeah, Chad, I'm curious. I mean, do you think this is just kind of one of those moments, that happens in a free market, economy when, the good companies, the ones that, based on your evaluation, your colleagues, are the right ones, the ones that Ave Maria Mutual Funds would probably invest in, they're gonna prosper, they're gonna persevere through a moment of uncertainty, and the ones that were poorly managed, the ones that just didn't really have a strong reason to exist, they're probably gonna have a tough time, or maybe close up, right? I mean, that's kind of the moment we're in.
Yeah, those companies are going to have a tough time and probably close up. And what I saw happen a lot was that the baby often got thrown out with the bathwater. So a lot of good companies, stock got punished as well, along with the bad companies. And so what that provided was an opportunity to buy more of the good ones and reap the benefits this year, which I think we'll see happen. A lot of the companies that were down last year, that were good companies, perhaps a little bit misunderstood by the market, were severely punished, and I think you'll see them rebound pretty strongly this year. And frankly, that's probably why we had such great performance in the Focus Fund in January, because that process started to happen. But on these, when anybody who's an investor gets in front of somebody in the media, they always talk about the markets and forecasts, and it's fun to make forecasts, but forecasts can often be wrong. And so while it's tough to forecast what's going to happen in the stock market, it's not too tough to prepare for what may happen. And the way that we prepare is buying companies whose operating performance, distinct from the stock price performance in the short run, whose operating performance over a long period of time will do well no matter what's going on in the markets. And so that's the approach that we take. And sometimes Mr. Market is a little crazy, and the stock price may diverge from the operating performance of those businesses. But as long as the operating performance is strong over time, we think our shareholders will be rewarded.
Chad, looking back at the beginning of 2022 and the difference in interest rates, like you just mentioned a minute ago, I guess looking back, I mean, do you think the Fed should have done anything differently? I mean, how would you have played that if you were master of the universe?
I think the Fed has done a remarkable job through COVID to stave off global depression. I think that they've been fine on the interest rates. I don't think it was helpful to have the large spending program that we got from the Biden administration right when they took over. I think that was kind of unnecessary and hurt the inflation cause. Made inflation worse. But I think that what the Fed did was correct. Now the question is, going forward, is inflation behind us? It's the rate of inflation's increases are certainly coming down. Will the Fed keep rates up too high for too long? I don't know. I know my companies are going to do well, should do quite well regardless. And so, if I wanted to look back at the decisions that the Fed made and decisions I made as a manager, I certainly had some companies that were growing strongly that would be affected by rising interest rates. Could have, one could argue that I could have sold some of those companies and bought something else, but these are businesses that I want to own for 5 to 10 years. And if I was going to get a little bit of a bruising in 1 year, what does it matter? I mean, if you look at the Tour de France, the winner of the Tour de France doesn't win every segment of it. So
I like that. Good
yeah,
analogy.
I'm quite comfortable, holding what I holding the companies that I held and not selling it. I want to own them for a long time. They're fantastic companies. They're growing at fantastic rates. So if I have to take a lump for a 1 year period, that's fine.
Yeah, you got to play the long game. Hey, Chad, you mentioned inflation, and you're right. The increases are not as great as they were last year, and I mean, I think it's around 6% right now, maybe 7%. You would know better than I do, but years ago we would have looked at 6-7% inflation, and on the core inflation, the stuff that hits the consumer harder, even higher than that, we would say that's a disaster. I mean, we would say that's it's terrible, especially for working people in this country, middle class people, working people, families. I mean, what does I guess a future economy look like if 5, 6, 7% annual inflation is the norm? You know what I mean? What are the impacts of that? I guess both for Main Street and Wall Street.
Well, that would be a disaster, but I don't think it's going to stay at 5-6% for a prolonged period of time.
You project it up or down? Okay.
Well, pre-COVID, the problem that they had was not enough inflation. Interest rates were extremely low in order to come in at around 2%, 2.5% inflation. And so what has changed in the last 20 years? Well, population growth is declining at a slowing rate. The technological advances over the last 20 years have been highly deflationary. I mean, if today you can get anything you want within minutes by a couple clicks on your phone. I mean, if you don't want to go to the grocery store, you can have your groceries delivered. The promises of the tech bubble, which was starting, the tech bubble starting out right when I was leaving college, like all the promises that led to the first bubble and it bursting, they've all been realized. They just weren't realized in 2002. They were realized in 2015 to 2020. And so I think there's a lot of deflationary forces. Now, the one thing I think has changed is energy. I mean, Europe has aligned themselves to be dependent upon Russia for natural gas. Russia took advantage of that dependence, or tried to take advantage of that dependence, and invaded Ukraine. I think Europe is doing a good job starting to pivot away from that, but energy prices may be a little bit more volatile, going forward than we were expecting over the last decade. But
yeah.
Otherwise, aside from energy, I think there are strong deflationary pressures.
Okay, very very interesting. And earlier you mentioned ESG. It's been very interesting to track that phenomenon over the past decade, or a little more than a decade probably. Where do you think just the mainstream view on ESG is? I mean, it seems like a few years ago it was treated very much as orthodoxy. I mean, for better or worse. But now it seems like it's a little bit more acceptable out there to maybe express some concerns or some contrarian viewpoints when it comes to ESG. What's your take on all that? As of February 15th, 23.
Well, let's take a look at how it's affecting some of the companies. So British Petroleum, about a decade ago, went from being called British Petroleum to being called Beyond Petroleum, BP, Beyond Petroleum. And they acquired one of our portfolio companies, Archaea Energy, which was a leader in collecting landfill gas and turning it into usable, renewable natural gas. So they certainly have a renewable component, but they're starting to pull back away from being Beyond Petroleum, and because they realize the importance of petroleum to Europe. And so you're starting to see them, instead of moving away from using petroleum to investing in it, which is what we'd want to see them do.
But in terms of ESG generally, I mean, do you think?
Well, the big push for them to do that was, the big push of them to do that was the pressure that they were getting from outside organizations and from investors organizations. So that came from ESG, and so I think you're going to start to see some pullback, because ESG is a fun thing to have when when things are going well, but when it actually costs you something, then, maybe it's not so nice to have.
No,
And
no, absolutely.
the cost right now is underinvestment in oil and gas and high energy prices.
Right, absolutely. So, in terms of energy, because I can tell that's a focus area for you. I mean, what have been the consequences of, I guess, our nation, the United States' reversal on energy policy? Up until, I guess, 2020, we were energy independent. We were, planning a future where there would be plenty of both traditional energy sources, petroleum, natural gas, et cetera, but also continued investment and emergence in new energy. There's been a real reversal on that in recent years. The country's no longer energy independent, and it seems like I guess that whole sector is, to borrow your term, a lot more volatile. How do you see all that playing out? What's the future of energy look like?
Well, we have some investments in it, and so I would say that the development of the Permian Basin in West Texas and other, unconventional, so as opposed to vertical wells, fracked wells is going to be quite strong. And if the government wants to tame inflation, then one way to do that would be to have policies that are conducive to extracting a lot more of our own energy resources.
Yeah, because it seems what hits the consumer more than anything is those gas prices. When gas is like $4 a gallon plus, that really hits working families, single moms, people that have no choice but to drive their cars to provide for their families, trucking, all these other critical industries that are relying on gas, and yeah, I mean that seems to be a big part of this.
Well, transportation is the largest use of energy. If you look at electrical uses as just heating your home, I mean that's coming from, most of that now is coming from natural gas. It used to be coal. If you go back to 2016, coal was large, and natural gas right now is the largest provider of home electricity. And nuclear, unfortunately, is only 8% to 10%. That's something that we could look at to get that up. But aside from the energy prices and the gas that you put in your car and electricity that you use to power your home, I mean, petroleum products are the feedstock for the base chemicals that we need to live our lives, and so it has multiple impacts in inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. So give us your read on technology. I mean, for so long, these stocks were, I guess indestructible. I mean, their performance was absolutely phenomenal. 2022 was different. What's your projection on the future of the technology sector?
Well, 2022 was hard on a lot of the technology companies because of the rising interest rates affecting them, as we discussed earlier. But now it's interesting. I think going forward, it's looking at the business models themselves. Are they much more vulnerable than they were in the past? And so Google search, for example, was thought to be an indestructible mode. And with the advent of AI, there's starting to show some chinks in that armor. As investors, there's good investors have what I call the too hard pile. If something's too hard for you to figure out, just put it in the too hard pile and don't really worry about it. So we don't have investments in Google, and we can kind of not have to worry about whether Google search is going to be susceptible to AI or not. But I think that's where I would look going forward. Are there going to be chinks in the armor in some of these tech companies? We definitely have some tech investments, and in those businesses, we think that there won't be any chinks in their armor. That they do have a nice defensible business. It's not changing. So, like one example, we were invested in a company called Autodesk, which is software for architects and engineers and designers. Well, there's 2,500 to 3,000 unique commands if you're using that software. So basically, it's like learning another language. If somebody wants to replace that in their business, it's like their employees are going to have to go and learn a new language. That's a pretty defensible product in my mind.
That's good insight into how you evaluate these things too. I appreciate you sharing that example. What's your attitude towards crypto? Another phenomenon that seemed to be kind of going upward, and then 2022 took a very serious hit. I think that it's continuing for most of them. What's your attitude towards cryptocurrencies?
I won't invest in it. We won't invest in it. I think the blockchain technology is interesting, but I don't see any use case for crypto. It's like digital gold, and I don't really have too much of a use for gold. I'd rather buy companies than invest in gold. People use gold as a hedge against inflation,
Right.
and I think the best hedge against inflation is buying a company that has pricing power, because if they have an inflationary environment, they can take the prices up, and a company that generates a high return on investment, because the inverse of generating a higher return on investment means that a company doesn't require much investment capital in order to grow. So from growing their business standpoint, they won't be affected by inflation. So if you have those two attributes, where a company can raise its prices and doesn't require much capital to invest in its business to grow, then I think that'll protect you from inflation better than gold will, or some cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I remember a smart guy told me once that the biggest fortunes are made in down markets, and it sounds like you would agree with that, to some extent. So very interesting. What about real estate? Real estate was hot there for a while, and then for a lot of reasons, including dramatic increases, predictable increases, I guess, with everything else going on with interest rates in mortgage pricing. There's definitely been a lot of cooling in real estate, across all the subsectors of real estate. What's your thoughts on that? Is it a good place to invest right now?
Well, the real estate that we're invested in is some more specialty. So we have investments, like I mentioned earlier, in data centers,
Sure.
in cell towers, which is a branch of real estate. We have investment in one company that owns the land underneath the cell towers, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But we don't own many houses. We do own a company that's got large investments in commercial real estate, such as some of the marquee office buildings in Manhattan, some of the marquee office buildings in London and Toronto and other financial hubs, as well as some interesting retail spaces like a mall in Maui, which generates higher dollars per square foot of sales than any other retail mall in the world. So we have a little bit of exposure to it, but most of I'm long real estate in my home. So I'll call it a little bit. And this is just my 2 cents on it. I think that the home housing prices around the country are probably due for a pullback, given the rising interest rates, and people have to put more equity into their houses. But I think that states such as the one where I live, which is in Florida, which has reasonable politics and low tax rates, are benefiting from the work from home, from work from home and other remote work aspects. So it's pushing people from high tax jurisdictions and maybe some crazy politics states into some Sunbelt states that have more reasonable politics and low to no income taxes. And so I think that those types of states are more insulated from a general pullback that we might see nationwide.
And it's interesting that you factor in the work from home developments in recent years into your evaluation. Do you think that movement, broadly speaking, is here to stay? I mean, I know a lot of big corporations have required employees to come back, and there's been a little bit of a pullback and all that. But it seems, at least to me, and I'm interested in your thoughts, that movement, broadly speaking, much more people working from home, remote working than ever before, that's probably going to continue and grow in the future. What do you think?
Well, this is just anecdotal, but I live in Naples, Florida. Florida is a place that people retire to. Some people came down early and were able to work there, but uh, the move to Florida after COVID has just been pulled forward due to remote work, and I'm still seeing people moving down now, and so I don't think that the remote work's gonna go away.
Yeah, I think so too. So, I mean, for instance, would you, I guess, as a secondary consideration, consider it a positive if a company had, for lack of a better term, more progressive attitude towards remote work? I mean, no, just because that's clearly the current, more broadly the direction it's going. We both agree. Would you be more favorable, not in a deciding level, but would you be more favorable to a company that what wasn't staunchly anti-remote work?
Well, I would say that I would leave it up to the managers
Of
of the
course, yeah,
business
yeah.
to know their own business and set their own policies there. So I don't have much of an opinion on that. But
You'd see that as more of a
if
tactical thing. Okay. Yeah.
sure, I mean, if times are tough and it's hard to get workers, and then the companies can set policies however they want. If the economy favors that of the worker, and the company wants to attract talent, then maybe they make some other considerations. So.
No, I respect that strategic perspective and also the humility to allow subsidiarity with allowing the local managers to do their jobs. That's right. So tell me a little bit about the Rising Farm Worker Dream Fund.
Well, the Rising Farm Worker Dream Fund was a nonprofit that I co-founded with one of my Harvard Business School colleagues, and so I learned a lot from him. So when I got into Harvard Business School, I was pretty excited. There was a book that came out maybe a year or two before I got in called Kindred Spirits, and it was about the class of 1948. And the book compared that class to a similar class at West Point. There was a class at West Point they said that the stars fell on because so many of the alumni from that class became generals. Well, the class of 1948 generated a lot of business leaders, and so they did a profile in that book. And one of the leaders said that one should spend the first third of their life learning, the second third of their life earning, and the third third of their life serving. And I thought that was a pretty interesting philosophy. But I met a friend of mine, Martin Curiel, at business school, and aside from his day job, which prior to going to Harvard, he was a petroleum engineer at Chevron, he founded a nonprofit that uplifted the lives of migrant farm workers. And so, he was able to both do his day job and serve at the same time. And so I learned a lot from that. So him and I decided to do the same, to start a nonprofit that uplifted the lives of migrant farm workers. And him and I both had some Western conservative ideals and strong belief in the individual and the free markets. And the way that we would make the impact was by helping children of migrant farm workers who had gone to college gravitate towards careers in business and ultimately to a top 10 MBA program, with the thought that if we could get children from that community to top business schools, then they would get great jobs, and they would develop financial capital, and they would develop political capital, and over time they would have much more resources that they can bring back to that community. And so we started it while we were both at Harvard, and we formally incorporated it in 2005, and subsequently we've helped probably over 20 or 30 children of migrant farm workers get into top 10 MBA programs and start successful careers.
So impressive, and what a great cause. How can people learn more about that initiative?
Well, it's just we're online, risingfarmworker.com.
Okay.
So if they Google that or they Google me, there'll be certain links to it.
It's really cool, Chad. And, related, Chad, for our listening audience and viewing audience, might be interested in hearing more from you and your insights. How can they connect with you? Are you on social media? Do you have a website? What's the best way to reach out to Chad?
Well, they can give us a call at Ave Maria Mutual Funds at 866 Ave Maria, or find us online at avemariafunds.com.
Okay, outstanding. Well, Chad, we've been on with Chad Garcia from Ave Maria Mutual Funds. This is the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association, presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. Thanks, Chad, for your time. Everybody have a great week. God bless.
Yep, my pleasure. It's great to be here with you.